2. Imagine waking up one morning to news that the world might end in a week. Not in a science fiction movie, but right here, right now. For 13 days, in October 1962, this wasn't just a nightmare, it was the terrifying reality for millions. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The moment humanity stared into the abyss of nuclear annihilation and somehow pulled back from the brink. To really understand how we got there, we need to rewind a bit. The Cold War was in full swing. The United States and the Soviet Union, the world's two superpowers, were locked in a tense ideological battle. Both sides were armed with enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet many times over. The doctrine was called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. It was a crazy kind of peace, held together by the threat that if one side pushed the button, the other would too, and everyone would lose. The stage for this crisis was set just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, in Cuba. In 1959, Fidel Castro's revolution had overthrown a US-backed dictator, establishing a communist government right in America's backyard. This was a major headache for Washington. In 1961, the CIA sponsored the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, an attempt by Cuban exiles to topple Castro. It failed miserably and pushed Castro even deeper into the arms of the Soviet Union. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev saw an opportunity. The US had placed Jupiter nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, right on the Soviet Union's doorstep. They could strike Moscow in minutes. Khrushchev felt this was an unacceptable threat. He thought, why not level the playing field? Placing Soviet missiles in Cuba would be the perfect countermove. It would protect his new Cuban ally from another US invasion and give him a powerful bargaining chip. So, in the summer of 1962, a top-secret operation began. Codenamed Anadir, the Soviets started shipping medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles, launchers, and about 40,000 troops to Cuba, all under the guise of sending agricultural equipment. They worked at night, under strict secrecy, to assemble the missile sites. On October 14th, an American U-2 spy plane, flying at 70,000 feet, took a series of high-resolution photographs over western Cuba. When intelligence analysts examined the photos the next day, their blood ran cold. The images clearly showed launch pads, missiles, and support equipment for Soviet nuclear weapons. The secret was out. The missiles were real, and they were almost ready. Quote, on the morning of October 16th, President John F. Kennedy was shown the photos. The gravity of the situation was immense. These missiles could hit Washington, D.C., New York, and almost every major city in the southeastern United States within minutes, with little to no warning. The strategic balance of power had been shattered overnight. Kennedy immediately convened a secret group of his most trusted advisors, which later became known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or X. For the next several days, they debated in secret, weighing the terrifying options. The atmosphere in the cabinet room was electric, with tension. The military chiefs, led by General Curtis LeMay of the Air Force, were adamant. They pushed for an immediate massive airstrike to destroy the missile sites, followed by a full-scale invasion of Cuba. LeMay called anything less a weak response, comparing it to the appeasement of Hitler at Munich, but Kennedy was hesitant. An airstrike could kill Soviet soldiers, potentially triggering a retaliatory strike from Khrushchev, possibly against Berlin or even the US itself. It was a direct path to a loud nuclear war. Others, like Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, argued for a more measured approach. He proposed a naval blockade of Cuba. It wouldn't remove the missiles already there, but it would prevent more from arriving. A blockade, or a quarantine as they decided to call it, to sound less like an act of war, would give Khrushchev a chance to back down without escalating the conflict immediately. It was a show of strength, but it also left the door open for diplomacy. Kennedy agreed. A quarantine was the least dangerous first step. On the evening of October 22nd, in a televised address that gripped the world, Kennedy revealed the crisis to a stunned American and global audience. He announced the discovery of the missiles, declared the naval quarantine around Cuba, and made it clear that the US would respond to any launch from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as a direct attack by the Soviet Union on the United States. His final words were chilling. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. and one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. The world held its breath. The US military went to DEFCON 2, the highest level of readiness, short of actual war. The next few days were the most dangerous of the Cold War. Soviet ships were steaming toward Cuba. Would they respect the quarantine or try to run it? If they did, would the US Navy fire on them? This was the brink. A single shot could be the spark that ignited World War III. Back-channel communications were frantically happening between Washington and Moscow. On October 26th, a KGB agent approached a US journalist with a proposal. The Soviets would remove the missiles if the US promised not to invade Cuba. That same evening, a long, emotional letter arrived from Khrushchev himself, echoing this offer. It was a glimmer of hope. Kennedy's team began drafting a positive response. But then, things got complicated again. The very next day, a much harsher, more formal message came from the Kremlin, adding a new demand. The US must also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. To make matters worse, a U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba by a Soviet surface-to-air missile. The pilot, Major Rudolf Anderson, was killed. He became the only combat casualty of the crisis. The generals were furious and demanded immediate retaliation. The world was closer to war than ever before. This was Kennedy's finest hour. The pressure to attack was enormous. Instead of following his military's advice, he made a brilliant and risky decision. He decided to publicly ignore the second harsher letter and respond only to the first one. His brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, was sent to secretly meet with the Soviet ambassador, Anatoly Dobrynin. In that secret meeting, Robert Kennedy delivered the crucial message. He accepted the terms of the first letter, a public promise not to invade Cuba, in exchange for the removal of the missiles, verified by the UN. But then he addressed the second demand. He said that while the US could unpublicly trade the Turkish missiles as part of the deal, it would look like they were caving to Soviet pressure and would anger their NATO allies. The Jupiter missiles were obsolete anyway, and the president had already planned to remove them. He gave his personal assurance that they would be gone within a few months, but this part of the deal had to remain a secret. It was a gamble. Would Khrushchev trust this secret promise? On the morning of October 28th, the world waited. Then, the news broke from Radio Moscow. Khrushchev had accepted the deal. He announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle the missile sites and return the weapons to the USSR. The crisis was over. A collective sigh of relief was heard around the globe. In the end, diplomacy, careful calculation, and a willingness to see the situation from the other side's perspective had won. Both leaders, Kennedy and Khrushchev, had stared into the abyss and realized they had more to lose from conflict than to gain. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a terrifying lesson, but it had a profound impact. A direct hotline, the Red Telephone, was established between Washington and Moscow to ensure direct communication in future crises. The following year, the two superpowers signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the first major step toward controlling nuclear weapons. The story of those 13 days is a powerful reminder of how close we came to self-destruction. But it's also a testament to the power of leadership and the human instinct for survival. It shows that even in the darkest of times, when the stakes are at their highest, a path away from conflict can be found. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into history compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you next time.